And I mean, what I challenge all of these people that say, oh, how can you talk about leaving Canada? And this is nonsense. Your fellow Albertans aren't going to come along with you, et cetera, et cetera. Well, we're at 40% in the polls now without taking the time to fully educate our fellow Albertans. Or, we're taking the time, but without our fellow Albertans fully internalizing the benefits of Alberta independence. I mean, the day Alberta becomes independent, we become the country in the world with the highest GDP per capita.
Unfortunately, the current Prime Minister, despite what he said to me privately when he was here, has now gone public saying he supports export taxes, he supports Bill C-69, he supports emissions caps. That is moving in the wrong direction. So we will get through this election. We'll see who ends up winning, and I will continue to advocate for those. And that's part of the reason why I will do a What's Next panel. We did that when when my predecessor came in to hear some of the concerns that Albertans had about how to repair the relationship with Canada at that time. And it'll be time for us to do it again.
Well, that's very interesting. I'll get to that panel in a second, but I just thought it was incredible. At some point, Canada has to start working for Alberta, and it's not right now. She talked about a What's Next panel, and I saw an essay in the Globe and Mail by Preston Manning, the former leader of the Reform Party and the Canadian Alliance, the son of Ernest Manning, the longtime Alberta Premier. I remember when Preston Manning first got going in the 90s. I was a kid. I was excited about it. It was actually the late 80s. I was a teenager, and here's this guy who said, no, Albertans, don't separate. Let's reform the Confederation. The West wants in, because the separatists, of course, have been saying the West wants out. Well, let me contrast Preston Manning in the late 80s and early 90s with his the West wants in nationalism with Preston Manning in 2025. I'm looking at an article published in the Globe and Mail a couple of days ago called Mark Carney Poses a Threat to National Unity. And I'm only going to read to you the last two paragraphs of this because it'll just show what a transformation Preston Manning himself has gone through. Remember, 40 years ago, Preston Manning really stopped Western separatism. Here's how he's talking today. If the Liberals, employing the fear of U.S. President Donald Trump to secure the support of easily frightened voters, should be returned to office, then the agenda of the conference, he was talking about a Where to Go Next conference, should be to consider ways and means of peacefully seceding. The next Prime Minister of Canada, if it remains Mark Carney, would then be identified in the history books, tragically and needlessly, as the last Prime Minister of a united Canada. I got to tell you, I used to work for Preston Manning. I'm talking 30 years ago now, 20-something years ago. He's frankly a moderate. He's not a radical. His purpose was to unify Canada, to fix Canada, to moderate Canada. He really was a nationalist. The West wants in. And now he is saying, if Mark Carney is reelected, get ready for peaceful secession. Joining us now to talk about that possibility is Jeffrey Rath, a lawyer, activist, and a teeny tiny bit of a troublemaker who joins us now live from the Alberta District of Foothills, one of the best places in the world. Jeffrey, welcome back to the show. And I remember when you spoke at our Rebel News Live conference in Calgary, you were one of the hit speakers. You've recently expressed yourself that the future for Alberta is becoming, as Donald Trump would say, a cherished 51st state. Where are you now? Do you think Alberta should stick in Canada, be separate but independent, join America? Is it possible to fix Canada? Give me your thoughts on things, because I know you're right there on the leading edge of this.
Well, I'm 100% in favor of Alberta statehood. And when I say statehood, I'm speaking as a political scientist. And what that means is a free and independent country that we're going to call the Commonwealth of Alberta, separate and apart and independent from Canada. So that's what we're advocating. I mean, the benefits of that are manifold. No more federal income tax, no more carbon tax, no more excise tax, no more capital gains tax, no more $70 billion a year going to Ottawa to only get ostensibly $30 billion in services back from Ottawa. well, we continue to fund gold-plated social services programs in Quebec that Albertans can only dream of. I mean, the day Alberta declares independence, the fuel prices for everybody in this province will be cut in half. We'll go from $1.60 a liter to 80 cents a liter. I mean, that's enough to get a good number of my fellow Albertans voting on that basis alone, let alone thinking about if you're a police officer, a fireman, nurse, teacher, whatever, making a decent middle class living of $100,000 a year, where you pay 35, 40% in federal income tax. All of a sudden, you don't have to pay federal income tax anymore. So instead of having take home pay of $50,000 or $60,000 a year, your take home pay jumps up to $80,000 or $90,000 a year. I mean, that's the future we're talking about for Alberta. And I mean, what I challenge all of these people that say, oh, how can you talk about leaving Canada? And this is nonsense. Your fellow Albertans aren't going to come along with you, et cetera, et cetera. Well, we're at 40% in the polls now without taking the time to fully educate our fellow Albertans. Or, we're taking the time, but without our fellow Albertans fully internalizing the benefits of Alberta independence. I mean, the day Alberta becomes independent, we become the country in the world with the highest GDP per capita, right? So, certainly the benefits of Alberta independence are manifold. I would challenge anybody to list off 5 benefits to Albertans of remaining in Canada that would exceed the value of the benefits that I just listed for leaving Canada. And, the other thing that I'm involved in, obviously, is our delegation to Washington. We're in contact with the U.S. administration at this point in time. I'm advised by contacts that we have in the United States that our correspondence has literally landed on the president's desk and is being reviewed at the highest level in the United States favorably and with much interest. Obviously, for the United States, a free and independent Alberta with strong economic ties to the United States, that embraces President Trump's policy of reciprocal tariffs, where if we have 0 tariffs on the Alberta side of the border, they'll have 0 tariffs on the U.S. side of the border, a negotiated open border with the United States, a much more robust economic union that the Americans can count on security of supply of Alberta oil and gas without people like Mr. Carney imposing emissions caps, production caps, interfering with our ability to ship oil by rail to the United States, like Trudeau did by changing the tanker specifications so that only Berkshire Hathaway can supply train cars for Alberta oil to move south. I'd like to know what the deal is between, the relationship is between Brookfield and Berkshire Hathaway, by the way. But yeah. I'm sure Carney's making some money somewhere. But anyway, I'll let you jump in. Sorry.
Thanks very much. So, I mean, we recently did a poll. We hired Leger, which is a pretty mainstream pollster, to test the appetite for becoming a 51st state. And I know you're talking now, you mentioned an independent state. I think there's 2 different conversations going on, if I may. One is a financial, it's a quantitative conversation. You've talked about some of that, the ability to save money, not ship money to other parts of Canada, to have a stronger relationship with the U.S. And Trump has talked about that too. I think he's alluded to exchanging the Canadian dollar at par. There was a lot of finance. It was like a checklist of benefits, most of which you could quantify, and others like military, which you could, I suppose, quantify too. But on the other hand, there's a reaction. And I think it's particularly strong in Ontario, because remember, Ontario, a lot of people in Ontario, they are descended from people who left the United States after the Revolutionary War. They were called United Empire Loyalists. They were folks who were fans of the king. They didn't like this George Washington upstart, so they just moved to British North America. And obviously that was more than 200 years ago, but there still is a strain of anti-Americanism and a strain of we're different. And so when you say break up Canada, you're not just talking about dollars and cents, you're talking about emotional ties, patriotism, loyalty, the king, the queen. And those are all emotional things that you can't sort of counter with financial things. Is it a
Well,
different
thankfully,
spirit in
people in
Alberta?
Ontario don't get a vote, Ezra.
But, I mean, I guess
So
that's the
they're
difference
not going to
between
be voting in
Alberta.
our referendum. So,
Of course not.
you know,
Yeah.
they can, you know, you can have all the Trump derangement syndrome you want in Ontario. I mean, I'm sure it goes hand in hand with their vaccination rates and the fact that they had such a huge amount of support for the COVID Nazism that a lot of Albertans thought was just completely out to lunch. You know, I myself am descended from a Lieutenant William Graves of the British Army who fought for the British during the Revolutionary War. So, you know, I mean, I understand that. I mean, we're not necessarily, you know, that's why we call our project the Commonwealth of Alberta Project. I mean, you know, an independent Republic of Alberta, we would imagine, would remain a member of the Commonwealth. We would certainly continue to have congenial relationships with His Majesty the King. You know, there's no reason that any and all of those things wouldn't be on the table. You know, we're aware that our fellow Albertans share some of those sentiments, but, you know, our feeling is, and I saw your poll, to be clear, the polling that we are looking at now has support for Alberta independence approaching the level that voted yes in the first Quebec referendum of 40.44%. And again, that's without Albertans internalizing how much better off they're going to be and their families are going to be from an economic perspective, let alone from the perspective of being free from all of the childish, arbitrary regulations that have been imposed on Albertans by Ottawa. You know, everything from all the stupid COVID regulations to Justin Trudeau, you know, seemingly every 2 or 3 months coming up with another list of firearms that he found too frightening to consider allowing people to continue to own. You know, all of those types of things, you know, like like 40 days within 40 days of him leaving office, he came up with a list of firearms that he was going to confiscate and ship to the front lines of the war in Ukraine that included people's 22 caliber semi-automatic Gopher rifles. I mean, it's this level of stupidity that Albertans are fed up with. I mean, not 40 days ago, we had Doug Ford thinking that he could cut off Alberta oil to the United States without understanding that Ontario's oil comes up from Line 9 through the United States. Yeah. So, I mean, Albertans are just done with being governed by idiots who don't even know where their goddamn oil comes from.
You know, it's my observation that different separatist movements around the world or independence movements around the world, a lot of it comes down to men of history. I look at the United Kingdom, where Nigel Farage, I think, was the personification of the Brexit movement. And that wasn't to break up the UK, but it was to break away the UK from the European Union. And I think his relentless campaigning, I think he was a man of consequence, and he made it happen. And I think of Lucien Bouchard, who championed Quebec secession. And he was like, and René Lévesque in his own way also. These men personified the project. They lived it. It was so clear it was in their heart. They bled it. And they had a deep connection culturally with the people they were seeking support from. Preston Manning, it's very interesting to me that he's talking about secession, but I just checked and he turns 83 in a couple months. So he's not the man to lead it. I mean, I'm sure he's still bright, but you're not going to launch a vigorous campaign when you're 83 years old, I don't think. Although these days I don't know. I think you need a seed crystal, you know what I mean? A crystal around which other crystals form. Who would be the leader of that? I think that's so essential because that person would immediately be attacked by the entire establishment, the media establishment. There would be investigations of them. The CBC would go to war against them. Who could be a leader to take Alberta, in your vision, to take Alberta from an unhappy part of Confederation to this independent republic part of the Commonwealth? Who would be that? Because history needs great men and women. It just doesn't happen.
Well, Dennis Modry and I co-founded the Alberta Prosperity Project for this very reason, which was to teach Albertans about the benefits of independence. Last night we had a meeting that was, attended by no fewer than 4 retired members of Parliament, some of whom served under Preston Manning, retired NHL hockey players, other members of Alberta society, presidents and CEOs of Alberta financial institutions, et cetera. I mean, this is the movement we are putting together. I'm I'm a barrister. I'm a very much a project oriented kind of, person. When I was on Fox News, they were jokingly, referring to me as the governor of Alberta. I stated at the end of, of that program that I have no interest in running for politics ever. But that having been said, I'm a very project oriented individual, and I'm committed to carrying this project across the line. It'll be one of my greatest professional accomplishments as a lawyer, which is to give effect to the independence of Alberta. So, we're certainly leading the charge. I'm at the front edge of this, as you've indicated. I mean, they've already started making fun of me on This Hour Has 22 Minutes. Somebody started a campaign with the Law Society to have my license suspended because I've somehow violated my oath to His Majesty the King by advocating a peaceful democratic process where my fellow citizens have a say in their futures and the futures of their family. It just goes with the territory. So, currently I'm out front. Will another leader come along and take my place? And I'll happily go back to doing what I do best, which is, working in the background and making sure that this thing happens. Who knows? Right now I, for good or ill, happen to be the face of the movement. And I'm happy to carry the ball forward and continue to do what we're doing, which is to vigorously pursue an independence referendum this year through APP. We're halfway to getting the signatures that we need for that referendum. Certainly, I'm advocating.
Whoa! I got to stop you there. Hang on a second. So we heard Danielle Smith, the Premier, talk about a referendum. You needed an enormous number of votes. Are you saying that you've collected hundreds of thousands of names to call for
APP has over 66,000 committed volunteers and supporters that are busily, because of the referendum period that Kenny put in, which is fairly short, a 90-day period. We're putting together databases of all of the names that we're going to need so that we can get those names all put in place with live signatures during the 90-day referendum period. Right. So we're working diligently to get.
What's the number you need to get? How many?
We need 300,000 currently, and there's some talk that the Alberta government may in fact pass legislation to lower that threshold.
I think that's an enormously high threshold, but daunting. I looked at it's been a while since I've looked at the legislation. I remember seeing it for recall, which is the ability to fire an MLA, and it's extraordinarily high. It's higher than could ever possibly be achieved.
Just to give you a feeling for how realistic this is. The National Firearms Association has over 100,000 members in Alberta alone, right? And, so there's 100,000 signatures right there, because I'm sure most members of the NFA have no interest in remaining in a country that just arbitrarily declares property that they own peacefully and legally, to be prohibited and not being able to be used anymore.